Hello, good evening everybody. My name is Dr. Anirban Bagchi. I am a medical graduate from Arjikar Medical College, Kolkata, and after MHA, I am in hospital management for last 10 years. I am extremely sorry for the technical glitches that I had today with this session at the start. So my sincere apologies to everybody who were waiting for this session to start. So today I will be talking on the topic that is COVID dedicated hospitals or sharing existing hospital space and need for makeshift hospitals and teaching hospitals in COVID care. So at the outset I'll tell that I'm working in a hospital currently in Mumbai, which is a pediatric and maternal specialty hospital. But today whatever I'll share is from my personal experience and my personal views and opinions. So I'll start. I'll divide this, today's talk in three smaller topics. The first one will be the need for new dedicated centers for COVID. See, there is no, debate or argument in this that for treating COVID patients properly, dedicatedly, you need separate hospitals for treating patients, or also the separate quarantine centers and makeshift units where you keep the asymptomatic and mildly symptomatic people who are mostly for quarantine purposes, as well as minimum support for treating the mildly and the severely ill patients. Obviously you need a hospital setup. Now question is whether we need separate COVID hospitals, dedicated COVID hospitals or not. So what I understand, what we have seen in Maharashtra and many other states, that the government or the municipality is either taking up a few private hospitals or government setup which are lying idle, and they are creating infrastructure there to treat COVID patients. In view of, first is the large number of patients, and secondly not overtaxing the existing setups and letting these existing hospitals treat their own patients in their own specialty. So I'll be just giving some arguments, justifications and reasons in support of why the new dedicated centers for COVID treatment will be recommended. See, there will be three major aspects based on which people will argue for new dedicated centers for COVID rather than going for existing setups and converting them into a COVID or a mixed COVID non-COVID kind of a center. So the three major the reasons that I will be highlighting in support of dedicated centers is, one is infrastructure and infrastructural issues, mainly infrastructure and logistics, and second will be some social issues from the patient and the attendance society side in mixing COVID and non-COVID together, and the third main reason will be manpower issues. So first point is that existing setups, the existing private hospitals or government or municipality hospitals, they have their specific clientele, they have their scope of services which are operational already. They have their building, their infrastructure, their the specific areas available under them. They are utilizing them as per that. Now suddenly if you want to start a new COVID center or a new COVID kind of a ward or isolation room, isolation wards, ICUs, ER, OPDs, this is logistically, infrastructurally very challenging. You cannot really create infrastructure overnight, or even in our case, or even for that matter for most of the countries, it was very difficult to come up with very large number of new infrastructures for the COVID. So existing infrastructure obviously will be too much stretched if you want to start COVID dedicated specialist areas to take care of COVID patients. So infrastructure not only talks about the area, the building and the floor, but also the logistics, also the infection control measures to be taken care of, also the HVAC and other things. See, heating, ventilation and air conditioning is a very important thing for managing any infectious disease like COVID. So the ID hospitals and all are intentionally kept separate from the regular government hospital setups, only in order to manage the infectious diseases as per the infection control protocols, and there the HVAC and everything is as per that. But usually in existing hospitals where you do not take contagious diseases or infectious diseases like this, which are mainly airborne, it becomes very difficult because you don't have dedicated HVACs, dedicated AHUs, separate AHUs, separate air handling units, dedicated ACs for rooms and wards, negative pressure for the OTs, procedure rooms, all these things. So infrastructure, not only space, as I said, infrastructure also in terms of the air conditioning, the environment that you are going to provide to the COVID patients. And thirdly, infection control measures, obviously, because the hospital has a kind of a traffic footfall workflow. So in that, if you want to allow both COVID and non-COVID, it becomes really difficult from the infection control point of view as well. So these are the main issues. Plus logistics is one more thing. Logistics will include creating your inventory for taking care of COVID specific patients, their areas, their care. That includes not only the medicines but also PPEs, and there are many other consumables related to specifically for COVID. So getting all these things suddenly into a non-COVID setup becomes really challenging. Second reason that I already mentioned is social issues from COVID patients and non-COVID patients and attendants. See, this is also a very big kind of a challenge. Whosoever we have in the beginning of COVID pandemic, we had seen that in the beginning, obviously the COVID was a much dreaded, much big fear factor than it is now, because now it is in the community transmission phase. So people are more accustomed to having COVID patients at their home, in their neighborhood, and the infection is prevalent everywhere, in the market, in the on the roads, everywhere. So earlier the scenario was different. Earlier it was perceived that the hospitals will be a kind of a dense source for infection. So the non-COVID population were very tentative to go to a setup where COVID patients are coming. So that was a big kind of a mental block, as well as a practical challenge for continuing with your existing kind of healthcare service providing your existing healthcare services, the scope of services, if you start taking COVID patients. We have seen that in our hospital we are not taking COVID patients, but obviously there is a risk that some patient who has been admitted and who is getting treated, maybe in OT, maybe in isolation room or in the wards, comes with a COVID unknown status, or maybe even in some instances it has happened that the patient was admitted and operated with a COVID negative status, but later on the patient turned out to be COVID positive. So such cases still happen even in non-COVID centers also. So the issue of mixing COVID patients with non-COVID patients is a big no-no, and a big kind of a bottleneck or a big hurdle for the non-COVID clientele. So for private hospitals, it's very important to continue with your existing operations. So not to hamper that, it is important that you do not add suddenly COVID care in your portfolio, even if you have the the space or the infrastructure, logistics, HVAC support, etc., etc. And third thing was the most important, probably the manpower. See, all manpower is scarce everywhere, not only in our state or in our country, but also in other countries. We have seen that so many manpower crises have happened, especially with COVID setting in gradually in the community, in the hospital sectors. Majority of COVID positive cases were coming up from the healthcare workers in Spain, Italy, and other countries. So that is a contributing factor to non-availability of manpower for hospitals. And on top of that, now that so many new centers are coming up for COVID treatment and all, so there is a lot of vacancy for manpower, and they are being attracted towards that because those are government or municipal jobs and things like that. We have also seen personally, many other hospitals also must have seen the same kind of an exodus of nursing staff from around maybe June onwards, when the lockdown was a little bit relaxed and transportation started. Indeed, we had seen in Calcutta also, we had seen 2-3 hospitals had lost a large chunk of staff who had gone back to their native states, maybe in south, maybe in northeast. So they had gone back after a lock-in of about 3 months. They were stuck in the workplace, so they had to go back to home, and many of them were quarantined there. Many of them didn't want to come back, and then whosoever were available, they were also going to join other municipal jobs and other government jobs. So the scope opened up for them with so many new centers and new hospitals coming up. So getting suddenly extra manpower to cater to the COVID ward, COVID care centers becomes very difficult. And if that happens in your hospital, which is already a non-COVID, then it becomes very difficult to juggle the both spaces. So that way, if you want to continue your existing scope of services with the residual staff that you have, it is obviously better that you do not suddenly plan to have COVID in your existing hospital. Now going to the second point, feasibility of sharing existing hospital space. Now, the first point I spoke was on treating COVID patients. Now, if the person who is having COVID positive status only is having COVID symptoms, then they will go to a COVID center. But suppose they are having certain other issues which require certain other specialty works, other specialty care, but the patient at the same time is having COVID status positive, like delivery cases, like cardiac cases, like trauma cases. So all kinds of super specialized work is not possible in the new dedicated COVID center. So some time or the other, you will have to have think about how to create sharing of hospital space for COVID along with non-COVID, right? So though we are not dealing with COVID patients, but we have few hospitals which are nearby, which are catering to both COVID and non-COVID. So basically, what they have implemented and what we have also thought are on the similar lines, as to ensure the safety of non-COVID patients who are coming to hospitals, and at the same time creating the possible care path for the suspected COVID patients. We are not getting symptomatic suspected COVID patient from the beginning, but now, like the season coming up, like this rainy seasons and all, so we are getting a lot of fewer patients now amongst the pediatric age groups. So now there is a very thin line where you can think that we are getting COVID suspect patients or not, because the community transmission and fever symptoms are also very prevalent now. In the beginning, we are only getting few of the non-COVID, COVID negative patients for deliveries and all. Pediatric patients were very few and far between. Even the parents were not very willing to bring their kids to the hospital for, some commonplace ailments. They were only compelled to come in case of some real emergencies. So we also got certain cases, surgical cases, where the COVID status was not known and the patient was having kid was having an acute appendicitis. So these kind of things, or an acute fracture of hand, a radius fracture or something requiring a fixation. So these kind of things will come up in your practice, because these kind of patients will come with or without COVID. So now the question comes to protocolize things in an existing setup, so as to ensure the safety of non-COVID patients as well as that of the COVID patients, also the safety of your staff. So feasibility of sharing existing hospital space, I'll go point by point. One is that, as I said, we had made protocols. We had revised the protocols a lot of times. I think we had in total we had started making the protocols from April, and till August we had made some 6 versions of it. So as per the MCGM and government, ICMR, all kind of guidelines, CDC, WHO, we amalgamated all these things, most importantly the MCGM, that is the municipality of Mumbai. So as per that, we made the protocols and guidelines so as to handle the patients judiciously, so that there is less risk to the staff and the potentially non-COVID or clean patients. So what we have to think, if we want to share a existing hospital space for COVID as well as non-COVID, first we have to think of separate patient pathways for OPD, for emergency, for wards, for isolation wards and rooms, then OT, then ICU. So biggest challenge is for ICU, because you cannot create ICU overnight, and most of the hospitals have open common ICUs. Very few hospitals, private hospitals, have a cubicle kind of a single cabin ICU system, which may be very much feasible to get suspected or known COVID patients. But for those hospitals which have open ICUs, there it becomes very difficult. If you continue to get your non-COVID patients, clean patients there, you cannot really take or accept COVID patients in the same ICU. So you have to then restrict your service scope accordingly. OPD you can always create. We had started with a fever OPD outside the building. We had a little space outside in the open area, so we can always create a separate fever OPD or a suspected COVID patients, where they will be assessed. And if you are a non-COVID hospital, if you get the patient with typical symptoms of COVID, and if you get some test results also conducive, indicating COVID, maybe RT-PCR is a definitive test, but if not RT-PCR, maybe you can get something on the HRCT. So in such cases, you obviously refer if you are non-COVID hospital. But if you are a COVID facility, then obviously you admit the patient or advise home quarantine, depending on the level of symptomatology. So separate OPD, OT, ER, ICU, isolation wards, rooms, these are the things that will be the first that you have to create, and also to implement, and also to adopt practices in order to channelize the patients accordingly. So it will start from your security at the gate, screening the patients based on their temperature, and then getting a declaration form, asking them for any fever symptomatology in the patient as well as the household. And then as per that, the clean patients will be channeled in one clean pathway towards a clean OPD and registration desk and etc. And the suspect patients or the possible COVID patients will be diverted towards the fever OPD and the other possible suspect COVID pathway. So there are a lot of things that you need to change as practice for channelizing these patients adequately, so that they do not overlap or they do not cross each other's path, and the risk of intermingling of such patients are lessened. Plus, on top of that, you have to do a lot of reorganizing in your OPD lounge areas, waiting areas and all. Then you have to also follow many other practice changes, like you have to restrict your visitors. We have banned all visiting hours and visitors to the hospital inpatients since the COVID started, and we are still following it. Most of the hospitals are doing so. And also you have to restrict the attendance. Earlier we used to be a little lenient on attendance, because we being a mother child hospital, delivery cases happening, so you have a lot of attendants, family members coming and seeing the baby and things like that. We have stopped that. We have restricted to only one attendant per patient. And that also we are stressing to the fact that you do not change the attendant in between. You have only one attendant from the admission till the discharge. And of course you have to be very careful about the attendants who are coming and staying with the patient. Earlier, as per the protocol, it was very lenient. That's why we had started as a protocol to get the patient as well as the attendant tested for COVID. But then later on the guidelines changed. So what happened is then the test was restricted, so we could not get the attendance tested. So we had to rely on their declaration and the temperature check, and we had stuck to the point that only one attendant will be inside the room with the patient throughout. They will not unnecessarily go in and out and change, in order to reduce the mixing with outside people and world. Then we also had to protocolize everybody coming to the hospital, be it staff, visitor, vendor, patient, attendant, everyone to wear a mask. Without a mask there will be no entry, and we had also made available the masks at the entrance gate, so that if somebody is not having a mask, wearing a hanky or something coming to the hospital, we made them take a mask at the cost price of some 5 rupees or something, so that at least they do not enter the hospital without a mask. Then for the, as I said, testing, as per the guidelines we are making the protocol. So when the MCGM has made one simple guideline for all operative cases and the patients who require dialysis and who are on chemotherapy, these patients will be required to be tested. So we do not have these other services, but yes, we are running our OT throughout the COVID period. So we are throughout getting the patients tested before planned surgeries. Yes, attendance, the protocol varied as per the guidelines. So initially we had made it mandatory for the attendants to be tested. Later on we made it optional. Again, now it is liberal. So now we have not made it mandatory, but we are telling it is optional to you. But we have made one thing mandatory because the community transmission level is on. So we have made it mandatory that the attendants will be wearing a N95 mask. On top of that, for the staff safety, you have to take care of your staffs. Otherwise, earlier what happened in the very beginning, one patient coming positive meant about, I'm talking about a surgical case, about 7 to 8 OT staff and another 4-5 ward staff and maybe 1 or 2 your resident doctors, they had to be sent on quarantine. So to avoid these kind of challenges which jeopardizes the manpower availability further, we started making these PPs available from the very early times of COVID. So from about mid of April, initially the PPs were not as freely available as they are now, and the cost was also very high. But we regardless of the cost, as soon as it was available, we started getting the PPs, and we made it mandatory for all OT staff, all ward staff to wear the PP kits irrespective of the COVID status of the patient, because you never know, even a COVID negative report might turn out to be later positive, and there are also false negative reports. So we did not want any of our staff or our doctors or any of the hospital people to be on quarantine. So this is one thing that helped us a lot. We are aware of many hospitals which still are not making it universal, and hence they are having this issue of getting their large number of people on quarantine for at least about a week, so thereby affecting the healthcare delivery. So these are the main practice changes that we had implemented as a kind of a precautionary measure in the times of COVID. And there are a few things which also were started in a novel way. That was, one was a screening in the OPD areas, like the residents were trained to screen for and look out for specific COVID-like symptoms, and importantly, more than the symptoms, the history. In the initial times, the travel history was important. Now the travel history is not that important, because with lockdown and all, travel has been restricted to most extent. But now the household exposure is important. So if anybody in the household, not only family, suppose there are people who are having 24 hours maid staying with them, there are people who have their friends or some healthcare aide or somebody coming to their house every day for any elderly patient and things like that. So for such families, the household exposure history is very important. So you have to take a very detailed history and understand what the risk for this particular patient is, and accordingly you take a decision whether we have to take the patient in an isolation room, or you can think of putting the patient in a regular room. Because you cannot test all the patients who are getting admitted, especially the medical admissions. The surgical admissions, yes, I will ask the patient to be tested before a planned surgery, but for emergency surgeries you cannot wait for a COVID test report. So by default, what we do is we keep the patient till the time we get the reports. We keep the patient in an isolation room, and after getting the report negative, then we ship the patient as per their choice. And for medical admissions, we are not getting the COVID test done because the guidelines given by MCGM were restrictive in the after the initial time. So currently also we are going by the logic which is being followed now by CDC, that is symptom based approach rather than test based approach. So if a patient is not symptomatic, if the patient doesn't have any uh, exposure history in the household, then we are not unnecessarily going for the COVID test, because the risk of getting a COVID in the hospital is probably as good as getting it in your house. So unless somebody is at high risk or somebody is symptomatic, we are not now asking for any COVID test. But yes, we are getting declaration form signed at the time of admission from the patient attendants that yes, at this COVID time I am getting my patient admitted in a hospital, and if from anybody from the staff or other patients or attendants or anybody I get a COVID, I'll not hold the hospital responsible. This declaration form, probably medico legally and otherwise also, is very important for the hospitals. Tomorrow somebody should not come and tell that because of your hospital I got the COVID. This was very important in the beginning of this COVID pandemic, because that time the people did not witness or experience the community transmission. But once this community transmission started, now general public also have understood the risk, and they have seen that the people who have not been out of their house over 2-3 months time, still they are getting COVID. So they have now understood that it is not that if I go to hospital I'll get COVID. The risk is same if I go to a shop, to a mall, to a market, to a friend's place, to a police station, to anywhere else in the society, because the transmission in the community is on. We have also to implement certain infection control practice changes in view of COVID. That includes a lot of things, but the main important things are, we have put a lot of stress on hand wash. So for promoting hand wash practices across hospitals, irrespective of patient or attendant or doctor or staff, we have put the dispensers along with foot operated pumps in the entrance gate, in the OPD lounge area, in the staff entry gate, and then in the wards also we have kept the bottles. We have kept the bottles in front of at the door of each room. So these are all in addition to the hand rub solutions being available by the bedside before the COVID. So we have now made it available freely across the hospital in all areas wherever there is anybody going or coming, irrespective of their status, whether they are staff, they are visitors, they are patients or attendants. That's one. Second thing is that, as I told, we had started this practice, adopted this practice of providing the PPEs, the PPE kits. I'm talking about the specific PPE kits, along with N95 mask and the face shield or goggles. All these things to our OT staff from April itself, and then it's immediately followed with the ward staff also being included in the PPE kit. And we have also given the PPE kits to the on-duty doctors who are there by the bedside, and also to the housekeeping staff who are going to the bedside to attend to the patients, handle patients directly. And for the other supportive staff, as per the WHO guidelines and the Government of India's guidelines also, like the front officer, the security, all these ancillary staff also, we have provided some disposable gowns along with the surgical mask. And for certain specialties, we have restricted the services, like dental services we had kept on hold to all through this COVID pandemic last about 6 months. This month we have started with some kind of infrastructural modifications in place. Like we have put a portable suctioning machine, which is like a cap. It will be on the patient's mouth about 10 to 15 centimeter away, and it will be on when the procedure will be done or examination intraoral will be done. So it will be on throughout, and with the suctioning pressure it will take out all the aerosols and put it in the box, which has some 6 layers of filters including HEPA and ULPA filter, along with a UV disinfection chamber. So these kind of modifications we have put in the OT. We have kept a surgical smoke disposal system, which is connected to the trocar of the laparoscope. So whatever surgical smoke along with the carbon dioxide comes out during laparoscopic surgery, that also is an aerosol, and that was perceived as a potentially infectious kind of smoke. So this system actually is connected to the trocar, and the smoke comes out through the tubing. It goes through two layers, two filters, which are like one after another in series, and this surgical smoke passes through those filters, and these filters are the same like HEPA and ULPA filters, along with charcoal and all other things. So these two filters, and then the tubing connects it to a console where there is an UV disinfection chamber, and it is connected to the suctioning unit through which the smoke, the air after disinfection through this filter and the UV disinfection chamber, it is disposed of. So these kind of modifications we had to put when we had to ensure that okay, potentially any patient can turn out to be positive, and hence even if we are non-COVID, we have to take the precautions same as COVID centers are taking. Yeah, one more thing, for all general anesthesia, because when we do intubation of patients, it's the most aerosol generating procedure, and you cannot avoid doing a intubation for any general anesthesia case. And similarly in ICU also, you get intubation done for many patients. So for intubation, that includes the OT and the ICU. We had in the month of May, we had one vendor who had come up with an acrylic box with openings on the sides and a cut on one end. That box sits over the face of the patient who is lying down on the bed. So that box is put while starting the intubation, and after the intubation is done, the tube is put in the larynx and it is connected to the circuit. So once it is closed, then the box is removed and immediately it is clean, disinfected, and then it is used for other cases. So that actually, what does it do is it actually entraps all the aerosols that are generated during the intubation process. Because see, ideally speaking, you should have negative pressure OT in the hospital setup if you are having any such infectious disease patients with potential infectious diseases like COVID or H1N1 or anything which is aerosol or air borne. So because this was perceived as an aerosol based infection, so we took all these precautions, this intubation box, this surgical smoke evacuation system, this dental portable evacuation system. All these modifications were necessary in order to continue our regular services as well as to resume some services which were kept on hold. You must be aware that many of the dentists, the casualty amongst the dentist profession is probably the highest. What we have seen here from our own experience, that we have seen over last 3-4 months, about 4 or 5 dentists have died. They lost their lives, and it's not that they are all aged and with comorbidities. One of them was about in the mid-30s. So the problem is that dental practice is one of the very highest kind of risk of aerosol generation, followed by laparoscopy as well as orthopedic surgeries. We had also, as a policy, kept orthopedic planned procedures on hold so far, but we have now started gradually because the drilling is also perceived to be very high risk for aerosol generation. See, the perception, see the idea, and the understanding about the virus is evolving, it's changing. So as the CDC, WHO and the local authorities, Indian government, ICMR, the health department, the municipal corporation, they are coming up with guidelines. We are also modifying our protocols, we are also changing our practices as per that. Because the more we know about this virus, the more data we get, the more number of papers are published, the more kind of novel kind of study designs are made to understand the infectivity, the risk associated with different things. It will be more enlightening for us and more clear to us to plan accordingly as to what to do and what not to do, what to avoid and what to adopt. So from the initial time, whatever have been told, whatever data have been available, based on that we have tried our best to implement changes, implement practice changes, implement some of the modification, some of the infrastructural availability and other things. So these are some of the things that we have done, and we have so far been able to carry out our regular works without any without undue trouble. So as to say, one occasional patient turns out to be positive, one asymptomatic patient or an attendant occasionally turns out to be positive, but that's part of the scenario. So HVC challenges are still there, still remaining with us as well. But what we have done is we have kept the isolation rooms which have separate space, separate split units of AC, not big HU which is handling multiple rooms. So that was based on the initial the concept that was shared to us by the scientists, that it is aerosol generated and the virus cannot travel long distance, more than 5 or 6 feet it cannot go. So it was not airborne. So airborne precautions are much different from aerosol borne infections. So based on aerosol borne infection fundamentals, we had taken separate rooms for keeping the patients under isolation. And now if the thing changes to an airborne or something, then the whole game changes. But I don't see any such changes coming up, because so far these practices have yielded fruit, and it's been useful for segregating the potentially positive patients, and that has not impacted any of our staff as well as other patients. So far we have been able to avoid COVID as far as possible from our existing clientele of parturient mothers and NICU babies and PICU babies. So this is in short how we have been able to share existing hospital space, and I'm sure many of the hospitals have done similar things, and with judicious thinking and logical kind of reasoning, you can always come up with the best of protocols that will serve your purpose in your hospital setup to ensure staff safety as well as patient safety for both the COVID and the non-COVID patients. Coming to the third topic today, suitability of utilizing teaching hospitals. See, my experience with teaching hospitals have been twofold. Once I was a student in a government teaching hospital in Kolkata, as I said, and secondly, after my MHA, I was in a private teaching hospital for 5 years. So what I have seen so far, I am not an expert, or I am not working directly in a teaching hospital as such, but what I have seen so far, probably the government teaching hospitals are already very much overwhelmed with their regular specialty practice patients. So probably it is not very advisable to open up suddenly COVID centers in an existing government teaching hospital where lots of patients are there. It's literally overflowing with patients. The staff will be taxed, the patients will be at risk of exposure and contamination from each other and things like that. So I think, I am not the expert here, but I think government teaching hospitals probably will not be the right candidates to start caring for COVID. For government, I think the ID hospitals, the infectious disease hospitals, are the best options to upgrade them a little bit, to modify them a little bit, to reinforce them with some more manpower and other things, and logistics, inventory, supplies and materials. So that is the best option. And coming to private teaching hospitals, yes, I have seen from my experience that yes, private teaching hospitals have a lot of capacity vacant. They are having big spaces in terms of physical space. Infrastructure wise, there are a lot of vacant areas. Occupancy wise, there are a lot of vacant beds lying there. So it's probably easier to take up or start COVID care areas centers in non-teaching private hospitals. That probably makes sense for them also. It's a win-win situation for them also, in order to get more and more occupancy and footfall in the hospital, obviously with the kind of modifications in practice, infection control and other things, patient flow, pathways. So if implemented rightly, I think the private medical college hospitals will be in a better position to accommodate, start with COVID centers. One more thing I would like to say: if suppose some hospital is lying idle or vacant for some reason, or some hospital is just new, which has been operational just recently. I have been after my MHA in a hospital in Hyderabad, which was at that time 2009, the H1N1 just started. So in that hospital we were having very little footfalls, and occupancy was very low. So one surgical ICU was remaining anyway empty. So at the outset of H1N1, we were able to convert that particular surgical ICU in H1N1 ICU. So probably these kind of hospitals are also very good candidates for for fortifying capacity to handle COVID patient load. Similarly, in Bombay also, Mumbai municipality had taken up, converted rather, not taken up, converted one hospital which was about 750 beds, which was lying idle because of some disputes. They took help from different private hospitals and they put manpower, and machines were already there, infrastructure, the building and facility space was already there. So they just took help from different private hospitals to get some doctors and nursing staff manpower, and they started a big huge COVID hospital in that empty hospital, which was otherwise non-operational till that time. So these kind of setups are very comes very handy if you have the proper planning and vision. And not only hospitals, if I talk about those isolation centers and the facilities which provide you the the quarantine facility for people who do not have the space at their home to be self quarantined, because of large number of people staying in a flat of or dedicated bathrooms are not there and things like that. So many hotels which were lying idle, many hotels had been kept shut for months together. So BMC had collaborated with those hotels, and they have been converted into quarantine centers. Some of them are with BMC, so they are not charging to the patient, BMC is maintaining them. And some of the star rated hotels, they are offering it on payment basis to the affording class who want proper class of service along with privacy and other things. So all kinds of facilities can be created with little bit of planning and little bit of vision as to what is suitable for which section, for which clientele and which purpose. So as I said, private medical college hospitals you can take up for COVID centers. Yes, that makes sense. Government medical college hospitals are already overburdened with patients. Don't Better not to think of putting COVID patients there and create a chaos. Newly opened up hospitals, better to take over them and run them as COVID centers. It's very easy to do. Hotels and things like that, they are also not having their businesses, so you can tie up easily, have their facility for your quarantine centers. It becomes very easy. And probably their vehicles also are lying idle. So I see in Bombay over last 2 to 3 months, these hotel vehicles, the Innova vehicles and all, they have been converted into COVID ambulances. They are ferrying people who are coming to the quarantine centers back and forth on nominal charges. So these kind of things have been already done, and I am sure you all are putting up your efforts in your areas. So whatever I have shared here is what I learned and experienced through these last 5-6 months in this trying times. And though I am not involved directly in COVID care, but many of our friends, colleagues, batchmates, seniors, juniors, everybody, they are putting up a brave face in this global pandemic. So my heartfelt thanks to everybody who is directly or indirectly contributing towards handling this COVID pandemic with their heart and soul. They are probably risking their own lives, they are probably risking their family's life, family's safety, everything at stake, but they are standing there like true warriors. hats off to them, salute to them. So thank you all for your time, and take care every one of you, because for the world you are the doctors, but for your family you are the man or the woman. So the family, your family, they need you. So please take good care of yourselves. Wherever you are working, whatever you are doing, please take good care of yourselves. Don't be complacent. Don't take things little casually. Please be always very careful about following your hand hygiene, your PPEs, your masks and everything. Even if it is not so much mandatory or being watched by somebody else, it is for your own sake, for your family's sake. Please take care. Please be careful. We will emerge victorious from this. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Federation of United Doctors, for giving me this opportunity to speak to all of you, connect to all of you. It's very nice to feel connected. I have come to Facebook after about 6 years. I had left Facebook, but today it made worthwhile to come here and see all of you here. Thank you so much. Please take care. Bye and good night.